You know, they should got to host the Golden Globes instead of that stand-up comedian that they tapped.
He was awful. I'm a nerd, and I watched the Golden Globes, yes. And he was, I mean, he barely was on because they changed their format this year, but when he was on, it was just painful.
Yeah.
He made a Taylor Swift joke that was not funny at all and fell flat.
Yeah, okay. Well, so who should have actually hosted the Golden Globes is a funny lady. She happens to host Face the Nation. She's Margaret Brennan. I got it. I mean, she had me in stitches over the weekend when she was interviewing House Speaker Mike Johnson. Take a listen. And wait for the punchline.
Okay, I will.
I mean, it's a zinger.
Back in 2021, you were the lawmaker who circulated the legal brief known as the Texas Amicus Brief, challenging the 2020 election outcome in a number of states, which by CBS editorial standards makes you an election denier.
That's great.
CBS legal standards.
CBS editorial standards.
Yeah, oh, sorry. You are an election denier. You have now been dubbed an election denier.
The exacting journalistic standards of CBS demand that Mike Johnson be forever labeled an election denier. Great. All right, now let's now that we got the funny out of the way, let's hear it again. You get one more bite at it, and then hear what Speaker Johnson has to say in response. And again, he did a great job containing his laughter.
Back in 2021, you were the lawmaker who circulated the legal brief known as the Texas Amicus Brief, challenging the 2020 election outcome in a number of states, which by CBS editorial standards makes you an election denier.
That's nonsense.
Well, can I get you on the record on that?
I've always been consistent on the record. Did you read the brief? Did you get a chance to read what we filed with the Supreme Court?
Well, I have read extensively some criticisms of that.
You read commentary about the brief, but not what we submitted to the court.
But you recognize that President Biden won the 2020 election. Can you just put that aside as an issue?
President Biden was certified as the winner of the election. He took the oath of office. He's been the president for 3 years. The argument that we presented to the court, which is our only avenue to do so, was that the Constitution was clearly violated in the 2020 election. It's Article 2, Section 1, and anyone can Google it and read it for themselves. The system by which you choose electors to elect the president of the United States must be done by the individual states, and the system must be ratified by the state legislatures. That is language, plain language out of the Constitution.
Have issues with the validity of the 2020 election.
The Constitution was violated in the run-up to the 2020 election.
Look, I don't need to read Article 2, Section 1. I've read extensive criticisms of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution as well. I mean, Margaret Brennan is comical. Mike Johnson was much more charitable with her than he should have been. And then the follow-up question, so you still have issues. Margaret, see if you can follow this train of thought. I filed an amicus brief making an argument about the unconstitutional activities that occurred in the 2020 election. Since that was not remedied, I retain that belief that was memorialized in the filing I made. Is that what? No, I don't believe what I filed anymore. How does that make any sense? It's just so difficult. Margaret Brennan is such a good example of why it is. For more on this and other matters surrounding free and fair elections, Hans von Spakovsky joins us, Senior Legal Fellow for the Heritage Foundation, former FEC Commissioner, former lawyer for the Department of Justice as well, and author of Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. Hans, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. And notice that what came through, which was that she never actually read
the
amicus brief. She never actually read the complaint.
I read she read the talking points opposing what was advanced by Speaker Johnson in the state of Texas. She read the criticism of it so she could repeat the criticism of it. She doesn't have to read the underlying filing and make her own judgment. She just needs the talking points to criticize it and call people election deniers who don't.
Right. And that's so typical of the news media. Look, I've been dealing with reporters like her for a very long time now about election issues, especially election integrity issues. And they're not only ignorant of it, they don't want to hear the real story on so many of these issues because, as you say, they get talking points from the left and they just repeat them. I've run into that constantly.
Well, I mean, and by the way, just to close the loop on this aspect of our discussion about free and fair elections, the argument that Mike Johnson was advancing, where he had to explain a couple of times without getting into detail that the Constitution had been violated, and this was the argument that he advanced in the amicus brief. Can you just refresh our recollections to, as part of the framing for 2024?
Well, what he was arguing, what Texas was arguing, was that, look, the complaint that was filed by Texas is one of the best I've ever seen written. And they went through all the violations that occurred of election laws in a number of states. I mean, just to give you one example, remember in Pennsylvania, absentee ballots by state law were due by the end of Election Day. And yet election officials there in the executive branch just said, oh, you know what? We're just going to ignore that state deadline, and we'll continue to accept and count absentee ballots that come in after Election Day. I mean, that's a clear violation of the law and was a violation of the Constitution, which says you have to set out the rules of the election ahead of time, and you've got to stick to it. But that was just one of many examples.
Well, do you think we're going to have a fair and honest election in 2024?
Well, I will tell you that that we're in better shape in a lot of places. But look, I hate to tell you this, but depends on what state you're in. Okay. Many states, mostly red states, actually improved their election process over the last 3 years. They passed big reform packages. Georgia, as you recall, was one of them. In fact, remember that the reform package in Georgia upset Joe Biden so much that he went down there and gave this big speech about how it was Jim Crow 2.0. And what was he complaining about? The fact that, for example, Georgia extended its voter ID law to cover absentee ballot, which, as you know, so many people use now. But look, the other states not only haven't improved things, some states have made things worse. Nevada is a good example of that. California is a good example of that, unfortunately. So, again, it's going to depend on where you are.
As I'm looking at the election integrity scorecard at the Heritage Foundation, you can get at their website, heritage.org. The only swing state I see that I guess would be of concern based on the Heritage Foundation scoring is the one you just mentioned, Nevada. With respect to swing states, the others seem to be pretty solid or have improved significantly, including, and this is worth mentioning since it was, the critical swing state, Georgia, which is in the which is in the top 5. So, I mean, this is the question you get and we get too, which is, but even if he wins, even if Trump wins, will he really win? What's going to happen? And we always have the same conversation. Well, it's a state and local matter, so it varies state to state. But what we do see, and I think the Heritage Scorecard backs this up, is that the states that matter have made some improvements, although I think there's still a lot of concern about the state of Arizona because of Maricopa County, too.
Well, yeah, no, I think you summarized it. You summarized it better than I can. And look, even in Pennsylvania, they had a real problem there. The legislature kept passing reforms. The Democratic governor kept rejecting them. But you'll recall that one of the big factors in the 2020 election were Zuck bucks, right? Mark Zuckerberg, remember, gave $450 million that was then granted to big urban city election offices like Philadelphia. And in essence, they used those government offices to do get-out-the-vote campaigns for Democrats. Pennsylvania, the one bill they got passed that the governor finally signed was a ban on those kind of private donations by political partisans to local election offices, and that's a good thing.
Right, and so somebody made note of this the other day. Let's talk about Maricopa County, Arizona, for example, just to use it as a case study. In Argentina, they counted 27 million paper ballots in 6 hours. For their presidential election that Milei won. In Maricopa County, we have trouble getting results within a week. So if you're the Republican nominee or the chairman of the RNC, what do you do in a place like Maricopa County or Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, to ensure that there is ballot integrity and that if there are things that go awry, that you have it well documented and ready to take to court post haste? I mean, where you actually have a team and a strategy, which isn't what we saw from Team Trump in 2020. What would you do, say, in Maricopa County if you were directing traffic there?
You need to have your lawsuits prepared ahead of time, and you don't file them after the election. You file them during the election if, for example, your observers start calling you and saying, the voting machines in these precincts quit printing out ballots. As you'll recall, that happened. That happened in the election there. You have to be ready these days, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, to be in court immediately on Election Day. And these days, because so much happens before Election Day, there's so much early voting, you've got to be ready to go to court before Election Day when election officials aren't complying with the laws and regulations, or when, for example, the voting equipment is malfunctioning, which, as you know, happened in Maricopa County.
Right.
So this means you get into court in real time and you get an injunction to stop everything until, right? Is this what you're saying?
Yes, and to fix problems as they are occurring. You can't wait till after the election, which is the way things used to be done.
Let's talk about what's happening here in Illinois. A group of Illinois voters filed paperwork to keep Trump off the ballot.
Yeah, no, I saw that, and I saw that the state election board is going to assign an administrative officer to conduct a hearing on it. So imagine this. A bureaucrat, a state bureaucrat, is going to decide who should be the presidential candidates on the ballot in Illinois. I mean, the whole concept is just, it's not just crazy, but it is shocking that anyone would think that the state election board or a administrative hearing officer has the right to disenfranchise the millions of registered voters in the state and take away from them the right to make the choice of who they think should be the Republican candidate for president.
Do you have any doubt that the Supreme Court, once it takes up the Colorado case next month, will end this business that's occurring in Colorado, in Maine, and is being attempted in Illinois and elsewhere? Do you have any doubt that they will compel Colorado to keep Trump's name on the ballot?
Well, one can never say anything with certainty, but I think it is highly, highly probable, based on the constitutional history of the 14th Amendment, that they are going to overturn what Colorado did, and that in itself will overturn what the Maine Secretary of State did and stop all of these other efforts like the one going on in Illinois in their tracks, and that'll be the end of the effort to try to get Trump off the ballot.
What's taking so long? I mean, when do you think the Supreme Court is going to make their ruling?
Actually, they're acting very quickly. I mean, look, the Trump campaign filed its request for an appeal on January 3rd. Only 2 days later, January 5th, the Supreme Court issued an order saying, we're taking up the case. They gave each side about 10 days to file their brief, and they're holding oral arguments on February 8th, just about a month. But for the Supreme Court, that's acting very fast.
Yeah, they appreciate what's happening here and the sense of urgency.
Just impatient in the caucuses, or next Monday.
Hans von Spakovsky. Go ahead, Hans. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say they know they have to move fast because all these elections are coming up very quickly.
Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow for the Heritage Foundation, former FEC Commissioner, former lawyer for DOJ, and author of the book, Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. Hans, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
Right now,